Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good day, everyone. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good day and welcome to Advocacy Anywhere, powered by American Jewish Committee. Advocacy Anywhere is AJC's digital platform that enables you to engage with AJC's global expertise, content, and advocacy from wherever you are. Just last month, AJC's Disrupt Antisemitism Incubator awarded $50,000 to 5 young American Jews who have developed bold ideas to take on Jew hatred locally, nationally, and/or virtually. We are so delighted to be joined today by 2 of the Young and Innovative Award winners who are confronting a climate of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. Jason Kessler, lead anchor for Jew or False, a digital content series designed to fight anti-Semitism, and Blake Flayton, founder of New Zionist Congress, an organization dedicated to combating the rising tide of anti-Zionism in youth-centered spaces. And moderating today's conversation is AJC Director of Alexander Young Leadership, Maggie Fredman, who is a Disrupt Antisemitism Selection Committee member and mentor. After we hear from Maggie and our esteemed guests, we will take your questions. You may email your question to questions@ajc.org. That's questions plural, or you can use the Q&A feature in Zoom. Maggie, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Daniel. So earlier this year, AJC launched Disrupt Antisemitism, our first ever incubator for young American Jews, focused solely on developing bold ideas to combat anti-Semitism. It was inspired by the incubators of Silicon Valley, and we called on young Jews from across the country to submit their ideas on how to take on anti-Semitism. Joining me today are 2 of our winners, Jason Kessler and Blake Flayton. Jason and Blake, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Let's jump right in. So the idea for Disrupt Antisemitism and really calling for our generation to bring fresh thinking to tackle one of the world's oldest hatreds actually was a result of a series of conversations between me and 2 of my AJC colleagues. As the country faced growing rates of anti-Semitism, our friends and our peers who previously had avoided the issue, they considered it too thorny, too political, whatever it was, started coming out of the woodwork and saying, like, hey, we're ready to call this out. We want to get involved. And Disrupt Antisemitism was our way of meeting the moment and saying, let's make a change. And we were blown away by the magnitude of submissions. So to get us started, what made you apply for Disrupt Antisemitism? And Jason, let's start with you.
Well, first, I have to say a very big thank you to everyone at AJC, to you, Maggie, to the selection committee. Just a few months ago, I was watching from the sidelines and I started following AJC. I started following you, Blake. And, you know, Blake, when I found your voice online, it made me feel less alone. It made it harder for me to be okay just sitting on the sidelines. And I promised that I would add my voice to yours and to the AJC's. And now here I am sharing a stage with you guys. And so a huge, huge thank you to the AJC for giving me this opportunity and pulling me into this community. I am a screenwriter and a filmmaker, but before that, I was a false advertising lawyer. I practiced law in New York. And so as a false advertising lawyer, I focused a lot on misinformation, false information, making sure that every claim in advertising is substantiated and backed up. So with that background, over the past handful of years, as I've noticed anti-Semitism rising, and I've noticed the narrative of Israel becoming more and more black and white, where people just coin Israel as the bad guy, I've been able to see the little nuggets of misinformation that are out there that are being used to justify this shift in public opinion against Jewish interests. And I'm not the type of person to just sit by and watch as people get it wrong, especially when it's something that's hurting me and my community. So that's why I wanted to start Jew or False. Jew or False is a satirical video series in the style of John Oliver, Daily Show, and its mission is to fight anti-Semitism and correct misinformation on issues important to the Jewish community. So we're just starting out. I'm shooting the first episode tomorrow, but everybody could go to jewerfalse.com now if you want to see a teaser video of what's to come, and make sure that you know when our videos are ready to launch.
So I will give a plug. The videos are hilarious. So definitely head to Jason's site. And Blake, I want to turn to you. Give us a sense, paint a picture. What made you want to apply for Disrupt Anti-Semitism?
So first, let me echo all of Jason's sentiments about AJC. I am so grateful, and the folks at NZC were so grateful for this opportunity and for the I guess, ability to work with the AJC on what we all agree, what we all have come to terms with is a very important goal and a very important project, and that is to disrupt anti-Semitism. So we're very grateful on this end. And in terms of why we began or why we decided to apply, it's because, you know, I'll take you farther back and then explain what NZC is. You know, when I arrived on my college campus as a freshman, being Jewish wasn't entirely that important to me. It was always a very big part of my life, but it wasn't a defining marker of my identity. You know, I didn't go on to campus ready to get involved in Jewish life and Jewish activity and Jewish politics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, I wasn't really looking forward to getting involved in the fight against anti-Semitism on campus because I didn't really think it had anything to do with me. And then I realized that it did have something to do with me, that in the spaces that I was traveling in and the friends that I had made and the jobs that I was working in, there was a lot of animosity. There were a lot of comments made to me. There was a general attitude in these circles that I found to be very problematic. And I took it upon myself to become an activist against these problematic ideas. I've written and spoken a great deal about the creeping prevalence, and not even creeping prevalence, it's just wide out in the open now, presence of anti-Semitism, sometimes called anti-Zionism on campus, whether that be a BDS resolution that goes forward to defund Hillel or Chabad or target Israeli scholarship on campus, or whether that be, you know, Hillel's being vandalized with spray paint, or Jewish students being harassed and being forced to resign from their leadership positions because of their, let's say, their Jewish heritage or their connection to Israel. So I took it upon myself to become an activist, but what I found out very quickly was that this is a very hard thing to do because the deck is stacked against you with just how many young people there are who don't like Israel and who don't really see it, the attacks against Jews because of Israel as problematic on campus. And so I started NZC, a couple friends and I started NZC in March of 2021 with the goal of trying to reach those students, those young people, whether they be high school students, college students, or young professionals, giving them a space to celebrate their Jewishness, celebrate their Zionism, learn how to fight back on campus confidently, learn how to fight back in whatever space they find themselves with pride and with passion, and learn more about their own story while they're doing it. Learn more about Jewish history, learn more about Jewish culture and customs and religion and faith. And I guess take as much as possible from the Jewish experience, whether that be going to Israel, which we haven't been able to do yet, or whether that be simply, you know, reading 3 articles once a week and, you know, discussing them and in full and at length and disagreeing with each other on Wednesday nights. So right now, NZC is in a little bit of a transition phase. You know, we did all of 2021 was very heavy on online programming. We had great success in interviewing some of the top thought leaders and writers and intellectuals in the Jewish community and hosting debates and movie nights and book clubs. We've had great and fundraisers and essay competitions. And now what we're really seeking to do is transition this into in-person programming, is to build grassroots chapters in big cities in the United States where young Zionists, young Jews can meet with one another to revel in their passion for Jewish self-determination and strategize about how to fight back against this rising problem. And we were so grateful for the to be a winner of the Disrupt Anti-Semitism Incubator, because this just takes us one step closer to that.
So Blake, I want to pick up on something you raised throughout this notion of pride and passion. So I think actually for both of you, Jason and Blake, you're talking to me from different coasts. You have very different day jobs. I venture to say you're at different stages in life, but both of you represent this willingness to engage in tough conversations, tough topics like anti-Semitism. Blake, let's start with you. I'd love to hear what gives you the courage and motivation to do that.
Well, you know, I've always been, myself personally, I've always been not afraid of being a rebel rouser, not afraid of standing up for what I believe in, not afraid of holding people accountable who I feel are espousing dangerous ideas. I've been doing that since I was little. I was very involved in politics from a very young age, but you know, not everyone has that. Not everyone has those qualities, and that's okay. You know, we can't expect every Jew growing up who's experiencing anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism to be right from the get-go ready to fight back and speak their mind, whether on social media or in person. And, you know, I was thinking for a while about what's the key to getting more people to do that. What's the key to allowing people to feel strong and confident in that effort? And the key is pride. The key is Jewish pride. The key is feeling wanted and safe in your community and falling in love with everything that the Jewish community around you has to offer. And I feel like once we do that, once we become more visible, proud Jews, and I speak specifically about the college campus experience right now, organizing campaigns against us feels less progressive, you know, when we're making it clear that we're not just part of the majority. We are a minority community with the same rights that should be respected as any other minority community. It definitely serves as a check on the most, I believe, venomous advocacy.
Beautifully said. And Jason, I want to turn to you. What gives you the courage and motivation to take on anti-Semitism?
It's a good question. And before diving into me, just listening to what you said, Blake, I think community is so important in this. And for me, I think lack of community is what made me take this long. And finding online community is what helped me feel less alone. For me personally, I'm like you, Blake. Like I always spoke my mind. I was that person willing to be the only person standing up for what I know is true. So why didn't I start True or False earlier? I bought the domain name many years ago, and I've just been waiting. And for my own personal journey, well, I quit law, I moved to the West Coast, I am starting a new career, other things were more important, the timing never felt right. And this Rosh Hashanah, you know, I think like many Jews, my various spiritual practice has waxed and waned over the course of my life. But this Rosh Hashanah, I was at services and I was praying for the first time in a while. And I was, you know, normally when you pray, you think about what you want, right? And I just found myself being grateful for what I had. In the time since I moved to LA, I found the love of my life. We've built a family. I have 2 wonderful boys who are happy and healthy. I've started a new career that I dreamed of my whole life. And I was just sitting there very grateful. And instead thinking to myself, okay, what am I supposed to be doing? How can I be serving the world? How can I be, you know, finding my purpose and giving back? And it was only like a couple of weeks later that I got the email from AJC about Disrupt Anti-Semitism, and I knew, okay, now is time. I have to do this.
What a reflective and meaningful call to action. I want our audience to learn about what it is that you both created. So Jason, I want to start with you. So there are many platforms to address anti-Semitism. Maybe they're not all effective, but there are many. Yours is a new one. So why choose satire, and why do you think this approach is going to be successful? And with it, who are you looking to reach?
Hmm. I hope it's successful. I don't know. We'll see.
I'm confident. I'm confident.
I think for me, it's my favorite way to talk about these issues, right? It's out of all the different formats, it's the closest to how I would just talk to my friends, right? Like focusing on truth, respecting your right to have a different opinion, but let me at least make sure it's based on facts and tell you the true facts. And if you still have that opinion, fine. But if those facts change your mind, I'm not trying to change your mind. If those facts change your mind, that's great too. Being silly, throwing in jokes, not taking myself too seriously. It's basically the format that I would just use talking to anyone. So that's why I like doing it that way. Why it might be successful, it makes me think about, I don't know if people read it, but there was an article a couple weeks ago in Teen Vogue written by a young Jewish woman who, the whole article was about how she has trouble talking to her grandparents about Israel. And you can understand that. The context is they wanted her to appreciate more about the value of Israel and be able to fight back against some of the anti-Israel rhetoric. She is firmly in a different camp. And she starts the article by saying, they gave me a book to read. And the next day I gave it away. She didn't even read it. So I don't want to get sucked into talking about that article and what I think about somebody who's wanting to have a conversation with her grandparents, but then won't even read the book that they give her. That's not a conversation, that's something else. But I guess I'm designing these videos to be a little easier than a book, right? Maybe the girl who wrote that will watch one of these videos. Maybe not. Maybe one of her friends will, and they'll know how to talk to her in a way that she's willing to be open to. Maybe grandparents could watch these videos and send it to their grandchildren instead of a book. So my target audience is everybody who cares about these issues, but also people who wish they knew more about this stuff, but don't know what sources to trust and don't know how to get started. People who love Jon Stewart and John Oliver and so many other satirical heroes, they love this format until those people start talking about Israel, and then it's hard to follow them. Jews who feel like they need to hide some of their Jewiness in some of their social circles, and maybe listening to me speaking unapologetically and wearing my Jewish views out there will make them have some community and feel less alone. And it's designed to be something that Jews could be comfortable sharing with their non-Jewish friends. So that, I hope that answers the question of who the target audience is, why I think it'll succeed, and why I like this format.
And I'll just say, having seen some of your work, it really is such a creative way to meet people where they are. And I think something we are so appreciative of at AJC is that unapologetic pride that you have in Jewish identity. I want to turn to another form of medium. I'm going to turn to you, Blake. So we've referenced it a few times in our conversation here, but you have developed a enormous social media following, and I want to say actually a beloved audience as well, who really view you in a very beloved way for your activism, for your sharp and nuanced commentary. You have been featured on CNN, the New York Times, to name a few. But for some of our viewers, there may be this question of how does an organization that focuses on Zionism, inherently called the New Zionist Congress, address anti-Semitism? So can you explain, because this is a really important point for our wider audience, the intersection that you are witnessing between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism and how your work addresses that?
Of course. And this is a kind of a multifaceted answer, but I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. Essentially, I believe very strongly that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, if not in theory, then most definitely in practice. And we can see that pretty obviously from the events of May 2021. when Israel was at war with Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And really, for the first time ever in the United States, the same can't be said about European Jews who have been dealing with this since really the early 2000s, anytime there's a skirmish between peoples in Israel, Palestine. But for the first time in the United States, Americans saw violence against Jews spill out onto our streets because of what was happening in Israel. That is very scary. That is a very scary development. In the United States, we are grappling with a ideology that is becoming more popular, I believe, by the day, by the week, by the year, that says that Zionism is an abomination, that Zionism is racism, that Israel is an illegal state, and that pinpoints Israel as the reason why everything is going wrong on the earth, and portrays Israel as the face of all that is wrong in the world. And what we're seeing is, as any society that allows that sort of thinking into its politics, into its body politic, it automatically becomes less safe for Jews to live as Jews, to practice as Jews, and to revel in the Jewish community. Whether or not, the Jew, we feel connected to Israel at all, it makes the country less safe for us because we find ourselves as a pinpoint of blame, as a pinpoint of accusation. And we're seeing that, quite literally as more and more Jewish organizations are attacked by so-called anti-Zionists. Zara Ballou, a couple days ago, the director of CARE from the San Francisco Bay Area, warned the audience that she was speaking to against, your enemies. And she meant Jewish establishment organizations and Hillel chapters on campus and synagogues and Jewish federations. That's a very, very serious development in this country. And what I believe to be the solution, and what I believe to be a consequence of this, is a lot of young Jews like myself who are turning away from that word Zionism. They are turning away from that word Israel because it's too exhausting to remain supporting it when they have so much flying in the face against them. And also, they're being told, and I experienced this firsthand on my college campus, they're being told that they were lied to, that they were being manipulated their whole lives, that they've been misled into supporting something evil. And the only way that you can, I guess, absolve yourself and cleanse your soul is to completely disavow your connection to the Jewish state and to really any sense of Jewish peoplehood or Jewish nationhood. I believe that to be evil. I believe that to be an insidious form of anti-Semitism that seeks to hollow out the American Jewish community and what we stand for and what our values are. I also believe it's been very successful. Among young circles, which is of course where the New Zionist Congress is targeted toward, we see it all the time. We see, Jews who grew up in very pro-Israel households with a very strong connection to their Judaism, and by the time they leave college, it really couldn't mean less to them because they've faced so many political litmus tests, and they've faced so much hostility when they tried to let this part of their identity shine through. So Zionism is a rejection of all of that. And Zionism has always been a rejection of all of that, whether it be, in 1898 with Theodor Herzl in Basel, Switzerland, or whether it be, in 2021. Zionism is not only just a political idea of the Jews saying we deserve to have a national homeland, but it is also the Jews saying we reject you treating us differently because we are Jews. We reject you holding us to higher standards because we are a part of this community. We have rights, we are equal with all nations of the world, and we have a history, a culture, a language, a peoplehood that deserves to be celebrated, and that deserves a seat at the table of international affairs. That's what Zionism means to me, and I think and we've had great success over this past year in making sure that as many young people as possible understand that's what Zionism means to them as well. And look, we're completely bipartisan. We're across the political spectrum. We have, in typical Jewish fashion, a range of ideas that are expressed at every single one of our meetings and every single one of our events. And we think that's healthy, and we think that's very good. And we mainly, our main goal is to counteract this feeling of hopelessness and subservience that I think is a problem among many young Jews today.
So Blake, I want to follow up on I think you raised two really important pieces. There is a lens outside of the Jewish community of using anti-Zionism often as a veil for anti-Semitism. And then there's the component within the Jewish community of young Jews, and I think you used the word exhausted, which I think so encapsulates it, of young Jews who say, I can't reconcile support for Israel, right? Like I don't want to, I am not Zionist. I feel like Israel has, challenges to it, and therefore I'm distancing myself. What would you say to young Jews who you interact with or who are out here watching, who bring those things to you? What would you respond to someone who brings that mindset?
Well, and this kind of goes to what Jason said about talking to your grandparents, except not that article specifically. But I always want to say, talk to your community, talk to Shoah survivors, talk to your parents, talk to your grandparents who might have grown up in the Lower East Side of Manhattan in tenement homes where I am now. Talk to your rabbis, talk to your camp directors, talk to your counselors and your, the Israelis who are on your college campuses, Israelis that you might have gone to summer camp with. Talk to those who are on your birthright trip. Connect with the people in your community and realize that this conversation is so much bigger than the people who do not have the Jewish community's best interests at heart are telling you that it is. You're right. There are some conflicting narratives. There are nuances. That area of the world is complicated. Zionism and anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are complicated. But anybody who is telling you that what you face is black and white, or that these issues are divided between good and bad, oppressor and oppressed, left and right, that person is not educated. That person, as I said before, does not have your best interests at heart and has a sinister agenda, I believe. So I know it's hard, but in speaking to your community and connecting with those who love you and who have raised you, don't you think we owe it to them to really seek out the truth of our Jewish identity and to put our best foot forward in making sure that we're standing up for our people?
I think that is such an important point that I'm so glad we had the opportunity to amplify here of this trend of simply writing off one's identity, writing off connection to Israel is one that is sinister. It is so dangerous. And it's not our history and it's not intellectually honest. So thank you, Blake, for laying that all out. I want to ask one final question to you both, because I know that we have a lot of questions coming in from our audience and want to give them the opportunity. So something that has come up, I think we've all verbalized in different ways, is that at times it can be lonely and sadly unpopular to call out anti-Semitism. And I'm looking at two people who embody turning a cheek to that, saying, I am going to speak up. I am going to make my voice heard. But as we've said, that doesn't come naturally to everyone, and it can be daunting. So Jason, I want to start with you first, and then Blake, I'm going to turn to you after. But Jason, what is one piece of advice that you would give to your younger self when it comes to speaking up on these issues?
Well, I think I've said this a couple of times, but I found a lot of value in finding the Jewish voices online and seeing that I wasn't alone. So my advice to people now would be, every time you see somebody on Twitter or on social media saying something that makes you feel less alone, follow them, like them. Over time, logging on to social media isn't as bad. It starts to make you feel good because you're around your community. And beyond that, I think that the right recipe for life, but also when it comes to these kind of issues, is to unapologetically be yourself, to speak your truth, to say it loudly, to say it with kindness and respect, but also to know your facts and educate yourself. But I guess what I would say to everybody, though, to kind of temper that, is it's okay to take your time. It's we all do what we can when we can. And there are different times when you might not be comfortable speaking up yet. So just know how to hold on to you. Don't let the fact that you're not speaking up crush your identity, and hold on to that community until it's the right time for you.
Yeah, and I think also such an important point that you made at the outset of social media doesn't just need to represent toxicity. There can be true community and inspiration, and Blake certainly, I will say for so many of us provides that. So yes, that is so important. And Blake, I want to turn to you now. What is one piece of advice you would give to your younger self when it comes to dealing with these issues?
Well, I would say first that anybody who treats you differently or distances themselves from you after you make the choice to start speaking out about anti-Semitism wasn't really a friend worth having anyway. Because this is far more important. And if this is really, really important to you, then you deserve to have people who are in your corner, who are going to support you and uplift you 100% of the way. And that's something that I really struggled with. You know, I wrote an op-ed for the New York Times when I was barely even 19 years old, when I was in college. And at the time, it's an understatement to say that the circles that I was traveling in did not approve of the message of this op-ed. They disagreed with my assertion that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. They did not like the certain groups on campus that I demanded to be held accountable. And so I lost pretty much every friend I had ever made in college. But after that, I gained more friends than I probably know what to do with now, in the Jewish community, both in person here in New York City and online. Thousands and thousands of young Jews that I've connected with across the country and the world. I have many friends in Europe and in Israel now. And so it was the best decision ever. And I realized how worth it was, because I mean, what was the alternative? Was I going to remain uncomfortable in spaces where people really didn't care about my Jewish identity and didn't see how it was important, and one step further would turn on me the second I made it important? No, it would not have been worth it. And I'll also say that no Jew who ever has spoken up about anti-Semitism has ever found it to be easy. It's not easy. You know, if it was, everybody would be doing it, but it's not easy. And when I look back at my heroes, the people who I admire the most, who I grew up, hearing stories about at Hebrew school, whether they be religious figures or Israeli figures, or even just my favorite Jew, Theodor Herzl, I know that every time I feel defeated or I guess like there's obstacles in front of me, I know that I'm in very good company. Let's just say that.
Well, I want to make kind of one observation before I turn it to Daniel. Something we talk about and think about a lot here at AJC is, of course, anti-Semitism is an issue perpetuated by non-Jews, and therefore it is for non-Jews not to commit it and to solve. But it's incumbent on us as Jews to identify it and speak out. And I mean, I cannot think of a stronger embodiment of that than the two of you, and your answers so got to that. Okay, with that, I want to give the opportunity to our many viewers to actually ask questions. So Daniel, I'm going to turn it to you.
Thank you, Maggie, and thank you, Jason and Blake. We've got a lot of questions here. So I'll start with a question from Rick Berkman, AJC leader, Philadelphia. And Blake, I'll start with you. Can we fight anti-Semitism in cooperation with those fighting racism and other areas of hate in America?
Well, I don't see why not. I think that, of course, the fight against anti-Semitism and the fight against all forms of prejudice and bigotry are not mutually exclusive. However, I also think it's important for Jews to maintain their particularism in that fight. anti-Semitism is its own phenomenon in and of itself. So we can, of course, blend in other struggles for equality into our efforts, but we also need to make sure that we're 100% committed to anti-Semitism as it stands on its own. And we also need to make sure that, you know, if there's a space that tells us that it's advocating for liberation and progress, but their track record on doing that for Jewish people is not where it needs to be, then that is not, in fact, a space that advocates for liberation and equality and progress for all people. And it's okay to think that. It's okay to believe that. I'm really interested in the years and in the future, I guess, on finding true allies. Allies that understand the Jewish people are their own people, who deserve the right to self-determination, who have just as much say and it's just as much authority on commenting about issues of oppression and marginalization in this tapestry we called American life. Any movement that doesn't do that is not worth allying for, but I'm allying with. But I'm confident that we will see. We're going to see more hope in the future.
Thank you, Jason. I'll start with you for this next question. This is from AJC Access leader Jeff Greenberg. We've talked a lot about the external forces turning young people off to Judaism or Zionism. What do you see as the greatest internal force turning young people off? And Jason, again, I'll start with you, and then Blake, if you have something to add.
Sure. I think it's a lot of what Blake touched on a few minutes ago, which is just the lack of community, the feeling of political homelessness that young Jews are facing now, where if they take all of their political views, whichever party, whichever side of the spectrum they're in, and they line up with the people that they would agree with on everything else, but their opinions when it comes to Jewish issues excludes them, they're not allowed to disagree on those issues, then there's such a big social pressure to hide that and to conform and to parrot the messaging that's kosher in those spaces. And that's a really hard thing to overcome.
I would just add that, you know, one of the things that the anti-Zionist movement has going for it right now is this sort of rebellious, speaking truth to power, marching forward towards justice type vibe to it. That is very attractive to young people, of course, because it sells itself as anti-establishment. It sells itself as, you know, rattling the walls and breaching the walls of power. We can't allow that to happen. And this is part of the New Zionist Congress's mission. We need to reclaim the revolutionary spirit of Zionism, because Zionism is, you know, it's a revolution in human affairs. After 2 millennia, the Jews, the tiny Jews, have the chutzpah, have the gall to demand their freedom. That's insane. And, you know, it's a blip in our history. 1948 to 2021 is not even a century. And yet that the movement to erase Israel is being framed as that which is, again, shaking the walls of power. That's absurd. We need to reclaim that mantle, that title. And the way we do it is by having young, energetic, charismatic voices who can rally the Jewish people and say, no, guess what? It's not just like Israel's established and everything's great. Israel remains important that we fight for this, because the world and the geopolitics of our people and other people are very fickle.
And can I jump in and add one more thing facing young Jews today is people don't appreciate just how tiny of a minority Jews are. There are so few of us. And that problem is exacerbated these days in the digital age, where everything is a popularity contest online, where getting ratioed is a thing, where, you know, tons of trolls could come in and cyberbully one Jewish voice, and it feels like the whole world's against them. And we really need to solve for that and figure out how to overcome the disadvantage from our severe lack of numbers.
Thank you. Our next question is from Pierre Steinemann in Larchmont, New York. Jason, I'll ask this to you. You work in Hollywood and you're often surrounded by fellow writers, actors, and other people within the industry. What do you hear amongst your peers when it comes to anti-Semitism? Are people concerned about it? Is it a topic of discussion? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Unfortunately, despite the tropes of Jews running Hollywood, I don't think the narrative is very good in Hollywood circles right now. I don't think it's marketable to be a Jew. I don't think it's marketable to tell Jewish stories. And I think all the things we're talking about with the pressures on campus to check certain parts of your Jewish identity, they exist, I'm sure, in workplaces all over the world, but including Hollywood as well. And I think it ties back to the thing I just said about numbers too. I mean, Hollywood at its core is a business, and some of the problematic areas from the past are driven by market forces. When it took forever to have a Black lead in a big superhero movie, it was because it wasn't marketable. It wasn't. It took market forces to overcome that. It's not like Hollywood just decided to be a little more moral. And these days, with Jews being such a small demographic and fighting anti-Semitism not being in vogue, I think that Hollywood responds to those market forces as well.
And just to say, for both Jason and for Blake, I think so much of what we're talking about here is narrative and simply making those Jewish stories, making the world aware of them. And I will just say, I think both of you are really doing your part to do that, to actually make the broader world in different ways aware of the Jewish experience and aware of Jewish challenges. So thank you for your part there. Daniel, I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Our next question is from Jill Freed in Palm Beach. Blake, anyone that follows you on social media sees that you receive pretty regular and constant hate from across the internet for speaking out on behalf of your beliefs and particularly your feelings about Israel. How do you decide when to respond, who your audience is when you're responding to? Can you speak a little bit about that, please?
So, I very rarely respond to people, which some people think is not true. But if actually you look, and I'll say this as a broader point, so it's not so shallow. But if actually you look on social media, what I tend to do is yell at people who am pretty certain and am not going to engage with me. I take aim at usually high profile figures and high profile organizations because these are the people who have the most power and these are the people who have the most influence. Very rarely I take aim or challenge the beliefs of smaller people or things that I know are not going to wield that much influence over the discourse of the day, or even much larger than that. Influence hearts and minds and ideas, thinking one way or another about Israel, about the Jewish people, etc. And the reason why I do that is because I feel like in the Jewish community right now, we understand that anti-Semitism on the internet is a problem. However, we have misdiagnosed where the problem is. Our efforts should not be concentrated on combating bots and trolls and people with not that many followers and people who are looking to say offensive things to start arguments and people who, again, wield no power, who say inflammatory things that all of us can agree are horrible. Yes, it's annoying. Yes, getting ratioed is, upsetting. I've been there many times. And yes, posting something as simple as Happy Hanukkah and finding that all the comments under it are a bunch of Palestinian flags and words against Israel is upsetting. But I feel as though us giving meaning to that makes it meaningful. And it in fact makes it worse. Our social media efforts, instead of focusing on that petty mishigas that penetrates Twitter and Instagram constantly, it needs to be focused on the people who are giving this messaging a pass. Organizations, people, public figures, politicians who are making the soil more fertile for hatred and bigotry against Jewish people. Don't bother with anybody else unless it is an influential entity. And if that influential entity responds to you and you get into a disagreement with them, great, because then more and more people see it rather than it just being in an echo chamber or in one corner of the world, of the internet. You know, people are going to say things that are untrue. That's not only the nature of the internet, that's human nature. People are going to say things that are biased and that are hateful. I don't see a reason to, I think it does us more harm than good when we waste our energy challenging every single one of those expressions rather than getting to the source of the problem to begin with.
Thank you. We have a question from Erla Jenkelowitz on Zoom that I want to pose to both of you. And Blake, maybe we'll start with you. She says, I'm a quiet person and struggle to speak in situations of confrontation. And about 2 weeks ago, I passed a group of people in my faculty talking about will.i.am's music tour and how he was going to perform in Israel. One of the people spoke up saying that Israel's an apartheid state, and she regrets not saying anything, but also doesn't know if she would have been able to. So what do you suggest to a person who is not as vocal, perhaps, as the two of you, but has spent time educating themselves and they want to stop this misinformation on campus?
Well, I would say again is just connect yourself with your Jewish community and find strength through them. You know, there's no shame, there's no embarrassment in feeling as though you're not confident in saying something yet when you hear comments such as Israel's an apartheid state. It's hard and it's daunting and it's scary trying to approach those issues, especially if you're alone. Especially if you're alone. But the really great news is you don't have to be alone. So if you start becoming better friends, forming better relationships with people who are more confident, and that could be virtual as well. As Jason said, that he found a community online. If you start listening and reading and connecting with those who are more confident and are more ready to go in the war of words, I like to call it, then that will 100% rub off on you. I've seen it happen. It happened to me and it's happened to others because they've hung out with me or because they follow me on social media. I get those messages every single day. I'm super optimistic when I hear those questions because listen, you're already halfway there. You want to speak up, and that's far that's far more than a lot of what other Jews are doing, where they'd rather just step back and not be engaged at all. So be proud of yourself for making that first step.
Yeah, I agree. And I agree that there's no shame in not speaking up. And that's a really hard one. That's a really hard question and a really hard situation you're in. And I'm sorry that you have to experience that in your workplace. But you know, it can't be each of our jobs to correct all the misinformation in the world, even though that's, I guess, technically exactly what I'm trying to do. But Israel is an apartheid state. There are so many layers of misinformation that had to get accepted by the public narrative before they start to accept the lie of Israel as an apartheid state. And if you just stopped that colleague in the hallway and tried to talk to them about that, it's so hard to dismantle it. So I guess, you know, what my approach might be, my advice might be in some situations like that, if you felt comfortable having coffee or lunch with that person and starting that conversation at some point, my advice wouldn't be to start by attacking the issue itself, by arguing the issue, but just focusing on how you feel, sharing with them, look, based on everything I know and I've learned, I feel like it's unfair to call Israel an apartheid state. And I don't want to go through it all, but I just wanted to let you know that there might be a different perspective. And when I hear you saying that in the hallway, it makes me feel a little less safe and a little misunderstood. And making it personal, maybe it won't help at all. Maybe this is bad advice, but I think that leading with your feelings, how it impacts you, centering yourself in that conversation, good people, if they hear that their words are having that effect on you, will at least think twice before diving into arguing the facts.
Just so I want to say, Jason, to confirm, not bad advice, good advice of really kind of leading with the personal. I'll also just say to everyone watching, I mean, you're looking on this screen at people who have been involved in this work for years. We are not in any way trying to make it seem, you know, easy and light. What I will say, in Blake, you touched on this, and Jason, is part of building up that confidence is educating yourself as much as you can. over-educate. I will say AJC is a great place to start. You can head to ajc.org for resources on anti-Semitism, on hatred towards Israel. Following Blake in New Zionist Congress, checking out Jason's videos, as I mentioned, are really a digestible way to get into this. So check out True or False. But AJC really has, innumerable resources to you. So be sure to follow us on social and online to get some of those.
Thank you. And we have time for one final question that I'm going to ask to both of you. And Jason, we'll start with you here. In a perfect world, what would the impact of your True or False project be? And for Blake, when we talk with you with New Zionist Congress, what is the perfect world look like? What do you hope that you will accomplish?
It's a really good question. In a perfect world, in a month from now, Comedy Central will pick up True or False as the new replacement to Daily Show, and it'll be embraced the world over by Jews and non-Jews alike. But slightly lower than that. I think that there's different approaches to a question like that. There's a strategic approach. What are my goals? What impact do I want to have in the world? But my decision to do this is also very internal. It's a value-based approach. It's the idea that I look at the long line of my ancestors who every time their generation had to face this question, they stood up in certain ways. And I just know I need to speak up. I need to focus on truth and kindness and do my part. And it's not my job to make other people listen. It's not my job to change minds. So for me, we live in an imperfect world, but if one person watches my videos and decides to speak up, if one person feels less alone, if one person remembers a fact on the video that I plan to do about how Israel is not an apartheid state and reuses that, then I've done my job. And everything above impacting one person is just gravy.
One of the most inspiring things that I've seen from the global Jewish community over these past 5 years, I would say, was the unification of British Jews, of Jews from the United Kingdom, when a clear and present threat to their comfort in that country made its way within an inch of the halls of power. Jews who were left, right, and center banded together to say, we recognize this for what it is. We recognize this bigotry, regardless of how much language of social justice and progress and liberty it masks itself, it cloaks itself in. It was a moment of unification, not total unification, because we're Jews, there's always going to be dissent. But it was a moment of really coming together and understanding our place in history and what we must do to move forward and to be free citizens in our own countries. And I really hope, I hate to sound pessimistic, but I don't see that same unification and that same trust in one another in our country. And I worry about, should this ideology come so close to power, I don't know that the Jewish community is capable, because of the division, because of the inroads that anti-Zionism has made in our community by way of young people like myself. I'm afraid of how we are going to respond. I'm afraid it will not be enough. I hope through efforts like the New Zionist Congress that the my generation that started this negative trend can reverse it and start a positive trend. And with the support of the adults in our community, with the support of the more establishment organizations, we're confident that we can reverse that trend.
So I want us to also end on a somewhat positive note. And Jason, maybe we'll think about the ambitions of getting on Comedy Central. I want to channel, Theodore Herzl's famous line, if you will it, it is no dream. I think you both are embodiments of that. We called this session the disruptors of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is complex. There is no one way to solve it. If there was, Jews would have found it already. But I will say, Jason and Blake, you both are true disruptors of anti-Semitism each and every day. And thank you for doing your part to bring light to growing Jew hatred and just to bring more light to this world. We're grateful for your leadership, and we are excited what comes for you both. And I will just say to all of our audience, to learn more about AJC's Disrupt Anti-Semitism Incubator and have links to Blake's work and to Jason's work, head to www.ajc.org/disrupt anti-Semitism. I see it here in the chat as well. And thank you for joining us. I'm going to turn to my colleague, Daniel, to close us out.
Thank you, Maggie, and Jason and Blake. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. And also a big thank you to our global audience who joined us today. And if you enjoyed today's program, please consider making a year-end donation to AJC. If you make a gift before December 31st, it will be doubled. You can visit ajc.org/donate, or you can text AJC donate to 52886. That's AJC space donate to 52886. Thank you again for tuning in. Have a great rest of your week. Blake and Jason, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.